During this video tutorial, we will take you step by step on how to successfully assemble a KSWC wire rope weak link cable head. It is important to note that the safety equipment and guidelines are here to get you through this procedure without incident or injury. Other operations during this procedure have potential hazards, so it's important to make sure all your proper personal protective equipment is on at all times. Installing your K20 pin, you want to thread it onto your lower adapter using a 1/4 inch deep socket driver. Thread it on, and once you get it all threaded on past the O-ring, you'll reach a stopping point, and you'll want to put a little bit of torque on just to seat it in, not too much. You don't want to strip out the threads, and your K20 pin should be good to go. When doing your lower assembly, you want to first start putting your O-rings on. You just have your standard Go O-rings, your 121 O-rings. You'll first put those on, and once you install those, you'll want to put on your 211s on the lower part of the assembly. Put those on. Once those are seated and everything's good, you'll install your molded connector. You'll notice the molded connector has a little shoulder on it, which seats to the back side of your K20 pin right there. So you'll put your molded connector in as the slots where they seat in to your lower assembly. Put that in. Once it's nice and seated in there, you'll then thread on your upper part of your assembly. Once it's nice and threaded on, just right now, if you make it hand tight, you'll notice that there are 2 slots for wrenches. You can use those, tighten them up. That should be good. When putting together your hunting tightening Go contact, you'll notice the bottom part of the thread has a slot. Just in case it comes undone, you could use a flathead screwdriver to unthread it from your molded connector. Put your pin through the housing part of it. You'll then thread the housing part onto the bottom part of your contact. Thread it all the way on. You can make it hand tight for now. It'll tighten back up once you use your nut driver to tighten it down to the molded connector. When installing your Go pin to your lower assembly, you'll first want to put in your insulator plunger, then you thread on your hunting tighten Go pin into your lower assembly using a 5/16 nut driver. You could also use an 8mm, same size, they both work. You'll thread it on. Once you get it all threaded on, you will then put a little bit of pressure on it, not too much, but just enough. Get it seated in there, and your pin should be ready to go. Once you get your lower connector assembly all together, you'll want to test it. First, you want to check for leakage. So you'll build up your megger, put about 500 bolts through. Test it from the body to the pin, make sure there's no leakage, everything's good. Then you'll want to check your continuity from your Go pin to your K20 pin. Make sure you have good continuity there. You'll put the meter on it, check the ohm meters. Once you check it, that should be a dead short all the way across. And as it is, your assembly should be ready and good to go. When installing your wire rope weak link, you'll just need to note that whenever you're putting in your weak link, you need to make sure that you insert the rounded part of your weak link where the smaller tab is on the rubber insert, and then you'll seat in your squared part of the weak link into the larger tab side of the rubber insert. And once you get those in, you'll push it all the way inside the rubber insert, make sure that nothing's sticking out, and you'll just double check to make sure your square part is on the larger tab and your circular side is on the smaller tab. When putting your wire rope weak link onto your lower assembly, I normally tap the spring pin in first. That gets it going, so you don't have to try to mess with that while you're putting everything together. You'll also note that whenever you're putting in your weak link, you want the slotted spot of the weak link facing your K20 pin. That's where your steel sleeve will kind of slide in there. So you have your rubber insert, you put that in. I like to put a punch on the back side of the hole that kind of like stabilizes and that weak link whenever you're tapping that spring pin in. So you'll slide that in, put that up, and then go ahead and tap your spring pin into your lower assembly. You'll notice that the spring pin is through and it's made it through, everything's good. Then go ahead and just tap it all the way through. You want to make sure that spring pin is flush on that lower assembly. You could also use a punch to kind of push it through if you're worried about messing with those threads. But once you get it all the way through, you'll notice everything's good to go. You're ready for your next step. So when starting your rehead, first thing you want to do is take the housing of your head and slide it down the line. That way you don't forget about it whenever you put it all together and it's out of your way. Next thing I'd like to do is measure where you want your stingers to be. I normally do it around 18 to 20 inches. Some guys do the arm length. That's what I just did there, which is roughly about 18 inches. And I mark my spot with the piece of black electrical tape. Then slide the stinger down the line and get my line clamps for my stinger, seat them in the slot for the stinger, and then clamp that into your vise. Make sure it's good and tight. There's little slots on that line clamp where you can kind of see it right to the lip of the vise. Next thing you'll want to do is install your makeup plate. You'll take your makeup plate and thread it onto your stinger. Get it all down. Once you get down, you'll make sure and kind of tighten it a little bit, that way it doesn't back out on you whenever you're putting your line on. Next is start to peel back your armors. In the procedure, there's an amount for each amount of armor, kind of how you want to space it, proper spacing. Right, this line is a 5/16 standard line, so doing about 3 and then skipping a hole. And so you just want to thread it all the way down. Make sure you go in the same direction and you line up your armors. Make sure they're not crossed up in the stinger. You keep going. And now your armors are all properly spaced out and seated into your makeup plate. Next step is to slide on your outer race over your inner armors. So you'll take that, slide that over, then you'll take your race driver, drive that all the way down, make sure it's driven down, drive that all the way, make sure it's all flush. If you don't have any armors crossed, it should make it all the way flush. If you do, then you probably have an issue with the crossed armor somewhere in your stinger, and you'll want to address that. Once you get that driven in, you'll pull out all your armors. The next step is to get your Dremel and set up. What I also like to do is tape up your armors around the line, just kind of gets them out of your way, and whenever you cut everything, it makes it a good easy cleanup. So we'll tape up the armors, then we'll get to dremeling. I got the armors out of the way. Take your Dremel. Also, it's important to note whenever you're using a Dremel or any cutting device that you need to have proper PEP, such as gloves, safety glasses. So once you're cut all around your armors, like I said, you want to make sure it's nice and clean. You don't really want any armor sticking up. Pull that up. So now that you have your first cone in, you're ready to go. The next step is to do your inner race. First you want to do is similar to what you did with your outer armors, is peel back each one at a time. Important to go the same direction, that way you don't cross anything up whenever you're crossing the armors up in the stinger. So once you line up that first armor, continue to go in the same direction, and you don't have to cross over any of your other armors. So you'll peel back each armor one by one. So trying to figure out which direction it went, make sure it's not crossed over in the stinger. You can also use pliers too if you want to pull it a little tighter. I did it hand tight. However you want to do it. Just make sure that your armors are pulled through and you got proper spacing. And they are also not crossed over in the stinger. Now that you got them all spaced out properly, your next step is to slide the inner race over your conductor wire. So you take your inner race, slide over your conductor wire. Whenever you're tapping it down, you will have a little lip. Also, it's really important that you don't slam it down like I did on the outer race, because you could damage the conductor wire and you could strip it back and cause a short. So that's why I use the hammer to drive in that cone and try to want to keep it as level as possible. Also, you don't want to smash it super hard because you could warp that race as well. So you don't want to do that. Just want to make sure it's good and seated tight in there. And then your next step is similar to the first one. Also, a little trick to help not damage your conductor wire. I like to use the race driver and put it back over the conductor wire while dremeling, and a little extra protection. That way I don't nick that wire. I go around, just make sure you cut it, get them all cut, clean cut. Use a Dremel because it makes it a whole lot easier and also gives you a good clean flush cut. Now that you're done, you've gotten your cones in. Check in, make sure everything's good and clean flush. Your conductor wire is not damaged. Now that you've gotten your cones installed, next step is to put on your cap. You'll want to unthread your makeup plate. Then you will take your cap, and there's a hole for your conductor wire to go through. You'll align your conductor wire into that slot. You'll go ahead and slide that over, then thread that onto your stinger. Once you get that on, thread it on the way, you'll go ahead and take a crescent wrench and tighten that on. Once you get that on, there's a ground spring you can install onto your cable. It just adds an extra ground backup for your cable head. Now that you've gotten your cap on, you'll go ahead and install your weak link to your cap. You'll go ahead and pop that on, and you'll also know the tab for your rubber insert goes right into that slot right above where the weak link goes into. Then you'll go ahead and tape up your conductor wire, stabilize everything and get it out of your way. You'll use glass tape or FTP tape. So you'll go ahead and tape that up real good. You don't want to tape it too high because you'll need some slack whenever you're putting on your steel sleeve and your boot. So you want to tape it about halfway on that rubber insert. Now that you put your tape on, you can do your boot and sleeve. Go ahead and measure your wire. You'll want to make a wrap around the rubber insert. Once you make that wrap, you can measure it. If your wire is good, you can leave it there. If you did accidentally make it a little shorter, it's not the end of the world. You can slide that wrap up and down. So that's the nice thing about it. Once you've measured it and clipped your wire, if it was too long, then you'll want to put on your steel sleeve. You'll notice an arrow on the steel sleeve, and that'll be pointing upward. You'll slide your steel sleeve on. Next, you want to put your conductor boot on. Put a little DC 111 inside the boot. It kind of helps insulate the boot. Also helps slide it on a little easier. Definitely nice to keep moisture out. Also, I like to take a little bit and put it on the conductor wire itself. Makes it easy for you sliding your boot on. You'll go ahead and put your boot, slide it on a little bit. Just push it down. Some of the grease will displace. That's okay. You don't want to pull it on super far, because when you make your wrap, it'll be kind of in the way. So go ahead and just pull it down a little bit, just enough to put your conductor pin on, your contact pin. Whenever you're stripping it, you want to just strip about 1/8 of an inch, just enough to seat inside that conductor pin. So go ahead and strip it back, put your pin on. If there's a little gap, that's okay. You don't want too much because you don't want a lot of flexibility in between your pin and your conductor insert. Alright, now that you've stripped it back, next you'll want to crimp your pin on. Go ahead and seat your pin inside your crimpers. Adjust it how you need to. Slide it in and crimp it. Take a little bit of force. You got to crimp it down good. And once you know you're going down far enough, you'll go ahead and release it. And you'll get a little tug. Make sure it's crimped on properly. After you've crimped it, you'll go ahead and put your Teflon sleeve. You'll notice on the sleeve there's a little lip, and that lip will be facing upward. That's what's going to go over your K20 pin. You'll want to probably slide your boot and your steel sleeve up a little bit, just so you can make your wrap. I said sometimes I like to slide the boot over the Teflon sleeve. It kind of helps it get out of the way. When you make your wrap, you'll want to make your wrap and seat your conductor pin onto the K20 pin. Go ahead and do that. Then you can slide your rubber boot over your Teflon sleeve. Then go ahead and get your steel cover and push that over your rubber boot. And take a little, just push it on up there. Once it's up there, you'll want to make sure that's flush up against your lower adapter. Now that you've assembled your boot and steel sleeve, you'll go ahead and get your tape and finish out your tape job. And you'll want to make sure that when you're taping that, it'll be as tight as possible. You don't want your wire to be loose at all inside the housing, so make sure you want to keep it as tight and as close as you can to that rubber insert as possible. So go ahead and finish taping. Point out whenever you're taping too, you'll probably want to tape it just about halfway up onto the rubber insert, because you'll want to leave a gap in between your conductor wire and that steel sleeve. So when you pump grease, it will kind of pack in all around that area and keep moisture out of that area as well. So you don't want to tape it all the way up. Now that you got everything taped up, go ahead and slide your housing over your connections and go ahead and thread it onto your lower adapter. And hook it up into the vise, and once you get started, go ahead and thread it all the way down. Once you get it threaded on, you'll have a slot to hook up 2 box wrenches, 1.5 inch box wrenches. Recommend not using a pipe wrench. It can mess it up, and it can also mess up the connections between the two if you get too close to the housing and lower adapter. You'll tighten it all the way through once you hook everything up to the CCL as well. Next, you'll want to screw in your set screws for your stinger. This keeps the stinger from rotating. So you'll line your holes up. You may have to turn the housing a little bit, or the cable. Line your holes up and thread it in. Go ahead and thread that all the way down until it's flush, good and tight. And then you'll want to do that exact same thing on the other side as well. So go ahead, you may have to move it a little bit. A little tricky with the cable there. So you'll thread that one down as well, and like I said, until it's all the way down. Then go ahead and tighten it. So that'll keep the stinger and the cable head from rotating. Then you'll want to put in your plug. Install one plug first, grease plug. Go ahead and thread that all the way in. Tighten that. And then you'll put a 1/8 MPT grease fitting into the other side of this hole. Go ahead and thread that on, and then you'll want to fill your housing up with DC 111. That's the best grease you can use. It keeps all the fluid out. You want it to come out at the end of your stinger, so you'll keep pumping until you see grease coming out of the part where that stinger is. After you're done, remove it, put your other grease plug on the other side, and you're good to go.